Hello, Slice Frogs, welcome back to another complete guide. This time covering Yoimiya, our newest 5-star Pyro character released during the second banner of Genshin's 2.0 update. In this guide, we'll be going over 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star weapon options, my personal weapon recommendations, talents and their priorities, constellations and their breakdowns, attack rotations and playstyles, team compositions, and ending with a showcase. Just like my other guides, Yoimiya's guide will likely be a long video, but I will aim to be as information dense as possible to save your time. Everything will be timestamped for your convenience, so feel free to skip around for what you need. Let's begin. Okay, so this is my Yoimiya. As a standard for my guide videos, she's kept at level 80 out of 80, she's Constellation 0, and level 6 talents. Unlike with Ayaka, I do not have 6 constellations prepared. If you haven't already seen my summon video, you can see what happened. I'd appreciate it if you could check it out after this one. Link will be in the description. If you are new to the channel, this is what I call baseline investment for new characters to showcase for guides. For all weapon tests, we'll be running a 2-piece mixture with Crimson and Gladiator artifact set. This is a default Pyro attack scaling DPS setup without requiring a difficult 4-piece to obtain like 4 Crimson or 4 Shimenawas, while still providing solid base stats. Keep in mind that 2-piece Gladiator is identical to 2-piece Shimenawas, as they both provide 18% attack. I'm just choosing a combination of artifacts that provides me with a solid crit rate, crit damage, and attack balance for consistent testing benchmarks. I will briefly gloss over my artifacts. I'll briefly show my artifacts here that I'm using. I'll go over them again when we explain how testing works. Pause if you need to. Keep in mind for the mask, I'll be switching to crit damage mask for some weapons that have a bunch of crit rate as a secondary. Similar to the Ayaka guide video, there will be an additional section covering my personal recommendations for weapons, which is especially important for Yoimiya because she's more reliant on synergistic weapons to shine. We'll be testing the main DPS based 4-star and 5-star weapons, and also adding the slingshot 3-star weapon, showcase her damage in the most common situations she'd be in. I'll go into specific testing details shortly. Alright, let's break down talents real quick, beginning with her passives. A1, or First Ascension talent. During her elemental skill, Yoimiya's normal attacks increase her pyro damage bonus by 2% up to 10 stacks for 20% pyro damage bonus. This is a straightforward damage boost during her typical normal auto phase, and you can see the amount of stacks by tracking the 3 glowing fireworks around her. You can see that here 4 stacks equals 1 glowing, 7 stacks equals 2 glowing, and 10 stacks equals all 3 are glowing. A4, or 4th Ascension talent. This is an extension of her A1 passive and is basically a mini noblesse buff except for herself. On Elemental Burst cast, party members are granted 10 to 20% attack buff for 15 seconds depending on the 1 to 10 stacks of her A1. Though the buff increases based on your A1 stacks, I wouldn't really recommend paying much attention to it, as in I wouldn't try to purposefully maximize getting 10 stacks before you use your Elemental Burst every single time. I would view the stacks as an extra icing on the cake and anticipate about 10 to 15% attack boost on average. These talents are both really straightforward damage boosts that are always active with her natural playstyle. A1 is for herself and A4 is for the party. Now, for the skill talents, we'll begin with her elemental skill because it is her most basic skill, but core for her pyro pew pew playstyle. So, elemental skill converts her normal attacks to blazing arrows, which are pyro and have an additional multiplier on top of her normal attack multiplier. At level 6, her blazing arrows are 149.9%, which is 1.5x the multiplier of her normal attack. In this form, her charged shots won't generate the mini homing kindling arrows. 10-second uptime, 18-second cooldown that starts right away, which means 8 seconds downtime for teammate swap. Okay, moving on to her normal attack. This is where over 75% of practical damage comes from, or up to 90% or higher with certain weapons and certain 4-piece artifacts and Q uptime. Her multipliers here, along with her E skill, are why her single target damage has extremely high potential, along with being pyro, which allows for reactions, but still suffers from internal cooldown or ICD problems. At level 6, she has a 94% to a 145% multiplier range, the highest of the bow users by 40%, with the second as Fischl, whose range is 64 to 105%. Now, with her E active at level 6, which further increases the multiplier by 149.9%, Yoimiya's normal attack multiplier range becomes 141 to 217% at level 6. This is an increase of over 100% from Fischl's multiplier range. Now that's extremely high for normal attack scaling with limitations on being a single target. Now for the meme, her charge shot generates 3 kindling arrows, right? And they are homing. So this is great for situations where you need to collect foul from like Timmy's pigeons or something. Finally, her elemental burst. She fires an initial AoE explosion that marks one enemy at random and lasts for 10 seconds. This This mark can be procced once every 2 seconds up to 5 times by anyone except for Yoimiya's own attacks. That means normal, charge, plunging, elemental skill, or elemental burst damage from any of your other team members. If the enemy dies with the mark on, it passes to another enemy within a pretty large range with the remaining duration. The AoE damage, however, has very limited range. You can see here that even though the mark passed from that Hilichurl onto the next one, the explosion was not in range to do damage. In most cases, this Q is just extra damage, about 900% limited AoE in 10 seconds from this. In certain situations, like Shimenawa's 4-piece, it may be more worth to sacrifice elemental burst uptime to increase damage for her normal sequence. Her normal sequence with her elemental skill is about 850 to 900% with all these multipliers intact at level 6 in just under 3 seconds. So during the same duration of her Q, which is roughly 2700% in about 9 seconds, which is pure single target. I'd recommend normal attack first, since not only does it just generically increase her base multiplier here, but it's multiplicative on top of her elemental skill. Her elemental skill is only about 50% as effective. You can see here that if I were to upgrade it, I would only be getting a 3%, but this 3% is on top of 150%, so the diminishing returns, etc. is only like 2%. So I would say 2 to 3% general damage increase, right? But it still does improve her blazing arrow damage, which is normal attack, which is how she plays. So it's extra damage. For Q, I would view as just extra AoE damage, though limited. For people going beyond level 6 talents, I'd say that 8, 6, 6, so 8 normal, 6 elemental skill, 6 elemental burst is a good threshold that doesn't expend too many resources for the gain, and then you can 888 at your own convenience. With talents covered, let's move on to Constellations. In my opinion, her strength at C0 as a single target DPS is very strong. Her Constellations continue to improve on her damage scaling and her uptime on her normal attack rotation quite significantly. C1. Her C1 extends her burst duration by 40%, or 2 instances of explosion damage, and also adds a self-noblesse buff to her Q on defeating a marked enemy. At C0, her A4 would only provide a team buff, not including herself. C1 adds 20% attack to her damage. This ranges between an 8 to 10% damage increase. C2, very straightforward 25% power damage buff off of a crit. The non-active character part just refers to when her elemental burst marks an enemy, and one of your other characters or co-op members activates it and it crits. 25% power damage bonus buff is about a 14% damage increase. C3, plus 3 levels to her E, with each level granting about 2 to 3% to her normal attack, so about 6 to 9% damage increase. C4 improves her E uptime by decreasing the 18 seconds cooldown. In practical situations, you get about 3 to 4 procs of this while maintaining the rotation of your party members in single player mode. In co-op, this Whale Constellation synergizing with C1's elemental burst extension can provide almost 90 to 100% uptime on your elemental skill, since other co-op members will be assisting in activating the mark. C5, plus 3 levels to burst, slight improvement to her AoE damage. And finally, C6. This is an RNG Whale Constellation that on average provides a 30% damage boost to normal attack rotation. However, with this constellation, her pyro application becomes very fast, and strict debuff buffers like Kazuha are needed to help her shine. With all this in mind, her constellations, in my opinion, are front-loaded improvements to her single target damage output from C1 all the way to C4. C6 is the extra pew-pew flashy one. Alright, brief discussion on attack rotation and playstyle for Yoimiya. Very straightforward and easy to digest. Yoimiya is one of the few characters whose full normal auto sequence is fluid. What I mean by this is, there's no start and end lag between autos, need for canceling, and her autos scale relatively well to further into the attack string. If we take a look at her talent page, N1 and N2 are about the same at 98% and 94%. N3, N4 are 25% stronger at 122% and 127%. And N5 is about 45% stronger at 145%. So, her attack rotation is simply N1 to N5, and we're actually incentivized to try to hit N5, the last shot, because it's the strongest one. This is what it looks like. Also, we can see that the end delay is not that long before starting her next auto sequence, so there's no intrinsic benefit in jump canceling or dash canceling. This is what it looks like. They're all about the same timing. So that means just dash as usual to dodge abilities. There's no real focus on specific timings to dash during her auto sequence. Now, because Yoimiya's main source of damage comes from her auto sequence, and with her skill active, her autos are all pyro damage, she does suffer from internal cooldown. That means if running Vaporize, only about 2 out of 7 to 3 out of 7 of her autos will actually proc the reaction for additional damage, and that is with a Xingqiu at C6. Same goes for Overload, but Overload causes an AoE explosion, and each individual enemy has its own internal cooldown, so against multiple enemies at once, chain explosions can happen. So that's her auto sequence with her elemental skill active. Regarding her elemental burst, I would say this mostly depends on the weapon you use, and even then it doesn't really matter. You can either use it right before elemental skill and have it active while attacking and rely on, for example, Xingqiu burst or Beidou burst to proc it, or after elemental skill is over and you're swapping to teammates for energy generation, or you're not even using it at all. Her Ascension 4 talent gains up to 10% attack buff ranging between 10 to 20% attack if the burst is used at the end of her elemental skill duration, which is nice, but I wouldn't play around it like I said before if it affects your team rotation. Some weapons, like the Yoimiya, gain a little bit of a buff if the energy is full, which incentivizes burst at the end of her elemental skill duration, and this synergizes with the Ascension talent. Some weapons, like the Thundering Pulse for example, jump in strength if the energy is not full or less than 100%, which incentivizes burst at the beginning or not having it in the first place. I would say that all these situations work, it's just pick your fancy or pick how your team rotates. Alright, quick debrief on how testing will work with Yoimiya. As you can see here, my roster of 14 level 80 plus bows. 3-star, we'll be taking a look at the slingshot. 4-star, we'll be focusing on the main DPS bows, most of them here. Avoiding energy recharge weapon Sacrificial and Favonius, as well as the EM sub DPS bow Stringless. Windbloom Ode I will be adding since it was technically free from an older event. For the 5-star weapons, Almost, Skyward, and Thundering Pulse will be tested. I'm not testing Elegy for the end. You may notice that Almost and Skyward are R590, and I will make note of that they're stronger than they should be in comparison to the Thundering Pulse, but you'll still see that Thundering Pulse comes out very strong. For artifacts, we'll be running Standard 2 Gladiator 2 Crimson setup. These are what the pieces look like. Pause if you need to. This mask will be swapped between a crit rate and crit damage mask. These are the two that I'm switching. I'll be switching to crit damage mask for crit rate secondary weapons like Slingshot, Viridescent Hunt, and Skyward Harp. This will balance their crit ratio so that crit rate versus crit damage weapons will have relatively similar total stats. Now, with these pieces, my Yoimiya's stats, currently she's holding the Yoimiya. With these stats, she's running roughly 2k attack, 75.4 crit, 156.5 crit damage, and 104.5 recharge, maintaining 61.6 pyro for every single test. Because of Yoimiya's Ascension stat gain, at level 80, her base crit rate is 19.4% instead of 5%. So you can see that even though I'm 75.4, my artifacts only give me 56 crit. For the non-crit weapons, these stats will be maintained and the attack will shift depending on the weapon. For the crit-based weapons, we should be seeing crit rates still maintained between 75 to 85, but the crit damage should be maintained between 190 and 230. Now, please remember, for these tests, I will be using crit rate food to boost my crit rate and make testing easier for myself. This does not affect the damage output we'll be comparing. I compare all crit numbers, and I'll make note of how much crit rate each weapon has a base. It should all be maintained equally. Okay, with that out of the way, let's begin testing, and for that, let's head over to the trusty Cryo Registry. Okay, let's begin with testing. First up, we have the 3-star weapon Slingshot. First, I didn't think to test any 3-star weapons, but after making a community post notifying my YouTube frogs that Yoimiya guide is coming soon, a comment had me take a look at this specific one. You may be surprised to see how well it does after seeing the 4-star test later. We'll be testing with a crit damage mask to balance the crit ratio. Let's take a look. Cool, so that's the Slingshot. With a slight requirement of being within 0.3 seconds of firing range, we can view this weapon as an F2P alternative to the Rust. Very similar passive to the Rust, we can view damage 60% is in the same additional damage multiplier as normal charge plunging or Pyro Electro Cryo, Anemo, Geo physical damage. With a 28.5% crit rate secondary as well as Yoimiya's Ascension being crit rate, at level 80, she already has 19.4 plus 28.5 or 47.9% without any crit rate substats. This essentially allows you to bypass the crit rate mask and go directly to the crit damage mask to maximize damage here. The super solid F2P option. Next up, 4-star weapons. Let's begin with the new craftable, the Yoimiya. With this weapon, I will showcase its damage with both her energy at 100% for double passive value here, and less than 100% for base passive value to visualize the difference. Okay, so the comparison is already starting to be apparent. Hamayumi's total damage sequence with my setup ranges from 36,000 to 39,000, which is roughly a 9% increase with passive double. This is expected. Slingshot is cruising at roughly 37k with the full auto sequence with passive activated, which may be surprising, but the math checks out. I'll discuss more at the end of testing. Now let's move on to the prototype Crescent, and for this weapon, passive will not be activated due to practicality since preparing charge shot for her is a huge time sink that could otherwise be 3 autos. Okay, moving on to the crit secondary weapons, Viridescent Hunt and Blackcliff Warbow. Viridescent Hunt up first, and we'll be switching to a crit damage mask or relative crit ratio. Alright, next, Blackcliff Warbow with 0 stacks activated. We're going to first switch back to the crit rate mask. So, the damage seen here is the minimum output from the Blackcliff Warbow because we're going to have 0 stacks. At R1 with 12% attack per stack, this can be seen as a 5 to 6 damage increase per stack. So basically, the range of this damage, right, will be like up to 15% damage increase with all the max stats at R1. Next up, the 4-star weapon of choice, Rust. This weapon is meant for normal attackers and scales heavily with refines. Here, I'm using R5, which is about 20% stronger than R1 at the same level, so keep that in mind for these damage numbers and adjust according to your refinement. I would say roughly that each refinement increases the damage output by between 4 to 5%, which is slightly diminishing the higher it is. And finally, the Windbloom Ode. This was a free event weapon from the Windbloom Festival if you played in 1.4. I'm testing it because some of you may have it lying around and wondering how strong it is compared to the other budget options. That is all the 4-star options. You can see that the 3-star Slingshot in general use case actually beats a lot of the 4-star options. That's the FTP Rust for you. In general, these 4-star options are all perfectly fine. For the FTP attack-based weapons, I prefer Hamayumi because it allows smooth rotations and universal damage increase compared to the prototype, which requires a charge shot and an enemy with a weak point to activate. It's not as practical, in my opinion. The crit-based weapons, Slingshot, Viridescent, and Blackcliff are all solid choices to help build out your Yoimiya if you're lacking general crit stats. Windbloom Mode if you have it lying around and you don't want to spend additional resources, and Rust the go-to choice if you have it even at R1. Okay, 4-star weapons done, let's take a peek at the 5-star weapons. Please note that my Almost and Skyward are R590 compared to the Thundering Pulse at R180. So Almost and Skyward are at 120% of their power, compared to Thundering Pulse at 100%. But you'll still see that Thundering Pulse with this handicap still reigns supreme. First off, Almost Bow in a close and medium range setting. Long range is not practical for Yoimiya's auto range, very strong attack and normal charge stat stick, but requires solid crit stats to shine. Next, the Skyward Harp, the most consistent weapon to build around, providing both crit rate and crit damage in a single weapon. I'll be switching to a crit damage mask to balance the crit ratio. We'll be taking into account the weapon passive as well. Finally, Thundering Pulse at R1. We'll be testing at both 2 stacks, which is default from the normal attack damage and casting elemental skill, and 3 stacks when the Q is not at full energy. I'll be switching back to the crit rate mask or relative crit ratio. Okay, so those are the 5-star weapons. Even though Amos and Skyward are both at R590, the Thundering Pulse at R180 is still able to do the same strength of damage. That means at all equal refinement and level, Amos and Skyward will be 20% weaker than the Thundering Pulse. They're all super solid bow choices though. Skyward provides innate crit rate and crit damage and has the highest base attack but no normal damage bonus. Amos provides attack and normal damage bonus but needs crit rate and crit damage substats. Thundering provides crit damage, attack, and normal damage, so it only needs crit rate to shine. I'll discuss a bit more in my weapon recommendations, but that should wrap up all the tests. Okay, now that testing is complete, let's discuss artifact recommendations. Beginning with the 4-piece sets, we have 2 focusing on normal attack damage bonus, 4 Shimenawas to maximize her normal attack damage rotation while sacrificing the uptime on our Q. Gain 50% normal damage, lose energy on elemental burst. Next, 4-piece Bolide set to also maximize her normal attack damage rotation, but requiring a strong shield support that will last the duration of her elemental skill, which is about 10 seconds. Gain 40% normal damage, just require a shield to activate. Next, onto the 2 focusing on pyro damage. 4 Crimson Witch for pyro bonus damage. Overload, Melt, Vaporize buff, limited to 1 stack on the 4-piece. As well as 4 Lava Walker for 35% damage bonus against pyro-afflicted enemies, which can be applied from Yoimiya from all sources of her damage. And then onto the more niche 4-piece sets. 4 Thundering Fury for overload comps to decrease cooldown of her E. And lastly, 4-piece Heart of Depth for the 30% normal attack bonus on activating elemental skill. This is basically a weaker version of Shimenawas and 4-piece Bolide, but no downside besides obviously the 2-piece set not benefiting her at all. Okay, just worth mentioning in case some of you guys have these sets lying around and don't want to reinvest in new pieces. Now, despite there being quite a decent amount of 4-piece sets, their corresponding 2-pieces don't benefit that much. Here's what we have for 2-piece mixtures while you're working towards some 4-piece sets. We have 2-piece Crimson for the pyro damage bonus, 2-piece Gladiator and 2-piece Shimenawas, both for the attack plus 18%, and the niche Wanderer's 2-piece just for the strict elemental mastery for reaction-based comps. Now, friendly reminder, it is more important to maximize the substats, crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent, instead of forcing set bonus. If you're not running a 4-piece set, it's okay to run a Rainbow Nose set with good subs. And finally, for newer players who may not have access to any of these yet, don't be afraid to run 4-star attack percent and berserker sets until reaching AR 45. Now let's dive into main stat pieces for the Sands, Goblet, and Mask. For the Sands, prioritize attack percent in all situations. Elemental Mastery and Recharge don't come close in terms of damage output. For the Cup, prioritize pyro damage, but if you don't have pyro damage yet, attack percent is usable. For Yoimiya, she has easier access to additional damage than other characters, so depending on, say, for example, if you are running a R5 Rust build, attack percent Cup is totally viable. Substats starts to matter more once you have an equal amount of additional damage bonus versus attack. And finally, the Mask. With her Ascension stat as crit rate, she's easier to balance crit rate, crit damage in the early game. As your subsets get better and your crit rate achieves above 60%, there's possibility of switching to a crit damage mask. If you're running a crit rate weapon like Slingshot, Viridescent, or Harp, I'd immediately jump straight to the crit damage mask and slowly build off of the rest of the crit rate from substats. That should be artifacts and main stats in a nutshell. Okay, so quick discussion with artifacts and testing complete. Let's talk about my personal weapon recommendations. Early game players just starting with very limited access resources, 3-star Slingshot is a perfect choice. It's basically a mini Rust, easily refinable as a 3-star and has crit rate secondary stat. For the 4-star weapons, Rust is the universal go-to even if you have it at R1. Hamayumi is the go-to F2P craftable choice. Obtainable from Tatarasuna chest NPC, which is in this area from exchanging Conscious after about a week, give or take. In general though, all the 4-star weapons are fine. Not worth to reinvest weapons you've already leveled, with the exception of the Rust. Now for the 5-star weapons, besides Thundering Pulse, which is the strongest option by a large margin, which competed even against the R590, Almost and Harp at just R180. Almost and Skyward Harp are both still super consistent choices even after almost a year of them being in the game. From an overall perspective, Yoimiya has a really good set of weapon options anywhere from 3-star to 5-star, F2P craftable to from the gacha. And that wraps up my personal recommendations. Okay, let's jump into team composition discussion. Knowing that she's a greedy main DPS that likes to stay on the field for 10 seconds when her elemental skill is active, off-field support DPS characters shine the best with her. Also, given that she prefers to complete her entire attack rotation for maximized DPS, shielding is equally as valuable as healing. So, one slot will be reserved for some form of healing shielding. We have Bennett, attack buff, pyro resonance, healing, cleanse. Diona, long duration shielding plus healing. Zhongli, shielding, built-in 20% resistance shred, and crowd control. Noelle, an option for newer players without the above, provides shielding and healing. And then Barbara is a last resort choice. I'll mention Sayu later when we talk about the Anemo supports and Jean. Now, for the other 2 slots, we have one for an off-field support DPS character, and the other can be another off-field support or an Anemo crowd control support with Viridescent Venerer shred. So essentially, 2 off-field support DPS or 1+1 Anemo. For offensive supports, we have Xingqiu, Beidou, Fischl, and Albedo. Kea and Rosaria together is a niche choice for extremely close range melt Yoimiya. Xingqiu and Beidou are excellent synergistically because their activations are directly off of normal attacks. Fischl is similar but requires Constellation 6 for the joint electro attack. For off-field Anemo Viridescent Venerer supports, we have Kazuha, Buffer. Sucrose is the F2P crowd control option. Venti is 5-star crowd control option, Sayu for additional healing, and Jean as well for additional healing. If running electro supports like Beidou and Fischl, be mindful of Overload's knockback and try to use terrain, barriers, walls, etc. to reduce the knockback area but still maintain consistent DPS. For reverse Vaporize Yoimiya, note that only 1/4 to 1/3 of her hits will actually proc the Vaporize due to internal cooldown, since her pyro attacks are extremely frequent. Xingqiu is the only choice here due to fitting all the categories of off-field DPS while still being able to maintain a hydro application consistently with C6. Mona, unfortunately, is a little bit more burst-oriented and is a bit awkward with Yoimiya's consistent damage. Now, for general team compositions that don't fall under the above categories, I'd like to briefly mention these alternatives. Double Geocomp. Double Geocomp with Zhongli Albedo, with the final slot being Bennett for his healing and buffing, sacrificing reactions going for pure pyro damage, or foregoing a healer for another off-field support DPS, since Double Geo makes a healer less necessary for survivability. This comp is pure focus on pyro damage, with Kazuha reducing resistances and buffing pyro damage for everyone on the team. Kazuha also allows for unique burst compositions that aren't really practical in Abyss, but you can flex against the Primordial Vishap. Setups involving Kazuha to infuse Cryo or Hydro for Melt and Vaporize Yoimiya are achievable this way through Kazuha. In general, Yoimiya works with a lot of different options that focus on off-field support damage. The difference between shielding and healing, like Diona, and a buffer like Bennett, comes down to how frequently you have to dodge attacks that can interrupt your N5 sequence. Every time you need to dodge and can't complete your full auto sequence, you lose DPS. Alright, so some pretty common compositions that you'll likely see with Yoimiya DPS. Xingqiu is going to be one of the most common supports, and then linked here, we can have Beidou, Sucrose to resistance shred. You can do double Electro as well. And then for the last slot, we have Bennett as a common healer for double pyro resonance, or Diona for the shielding, or Zhongli for shielding crowd control, minus 20% resistance shred. Alright, cool. That should wrap up most of the team compositions. Okay, let's showcase some comps. We'll go to Abyss 12 as our playground, and Yoimiya will be using the R180 new Inazuma craftable, the Hamayumi, for all the showcases. Cue the music, Mr. Coke. And with the showcase complete, that about wraps up the core of this guide. If this guide helped you understand Yoimiya a little better, consider liking the video and subscribing to the YouTube channel for more similar content. It's free and I'd really appreciate it. I also stream Genshin nearly every day at twitch.tv/Xlice or Xlice, so if you happen to watch Twitch, consider dropping a follow. Much love, gamers. Thanks to all who have been so supportive and patient as we churn out these guides. Not only is there a bunch of testing behind the scenes, there's also massive editing involved that requires post-release footage, so it's impossible for a video like this to be out right away. We try our best to be timely without sacrificing quality. Whether you plan to pull her or not, I hope this guide showcases her strengths and explains her weaknesses to give you frogs an understanding of where single target DPS lies with current content. I wish that everyone's still trying to pull Yoimiya the best of luck, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.